It was just past midnight when Emily merged onto the quiet stretch of highway that led out of her small town. The streetlights flickered intermittently, casting long, thin shadows across the asphalt. The radio played softly in the background, a mix of late-night news and soft, almost mournful music. She had driven this road countless times, but tonight it felt different, heavier somehow, as if the darkness itself had grown thicker. The wind whispered through the cracks of her slightly rolled-down window, carrying the faint smell of damp leaves from the surrounding woods. Emily's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white, as she tried to shake off the strange sense of being watched. At first, it was just a flicker in her peripheral vision, the suggestion of movement along the shoulder. She told herself it was a deer or maybe a stray dog, but the feeling didn't fade. A few miles ahead, she saw a figure standing by the side of the road. It was tall, impossibly thin, and motionless. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She knew she should keep driving after all. Late-night hitchhikers were notoriously dangerous, but something about the figure made her hesitate. Its posture was oddly rigid, like a mannequin left outside. And yet there was an unmistakable sense that it was looking directly at her, even from the shadow of the trees behind it. Emily slowed the car almost instinctively. The figure didn't move, didn't gesture, just remained there, silent, as if it had been waiting for her. The rational part of her mind screamed to drive past, to ignore it entirely. But the other part, the part that she hated admitting existed, wanted to stop, to see if the figure needed help. She pulled over slowly, heart hammering, and rolled down her window. "Hey, are you okay?" she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure didn't answer. There was no movement at all, just that unnerving stillness. Emily felt a chill creep up her spine. She glanced around, suddenly hyper-aware of the emptiness surrounding the highway. The nearest town was miles away, and the woods stretched endlessly on either side. Dark and impenetrable dot. She took a cautious step closer, peering through the shadows. And that's when she noticed the details that didn't make sense. The figure's skin, if it could be called that, was unnaturally pale, almost glowing faintly in the dim light of the street. Its face was obscured, shrouded in shadow, but she could swear she saw the suggestion of eyes, dark, unblinking, fixed on her. Its arms hung straight down, too long, too thin, and its fingers ended in points that caught the light like polished bone. Emily stumbled back, her voice catching in her throat. I think you need help," she stammered, though her words sounded foolish even to her own ears. The figure remained unmoving, silent. She felt a sudden compulsion, a pull she couldn't explain, urging her to get back into the car, to drive away as fast as possible. The rational part of her mind won this time. She jumped back into the driver's seat and locked the doors, the engine roaring to life. As she sped down the highway, heart racing, she couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. The rearview mirror reflected only the dark, empty road behind her, but she swore over and over that she could see movement shapes that vanished when she blinked. Every mile she drove seemed to stretch, the darkness pressing closer, as though the figure had somehow entered the space behind her, growing taller, closer. By the time she reached the next exit, Emily was shaking uncontrollably. She glanced in the rearview mirror one last time and froze. There, in the shadows of the trees lining the highway, she saw again the tall, thin figure standing exactly where she had left it. Except now, she could see it more clearly. It didn't move at all, didn't breathe, didn't blink, but the sensation of its gaze burned through her as if it had somehow entered her mind. Emily didn't stop until she reached her apartment complex, bolting the door behind her and leaning against it, gasping. She tried to rationalize what she had seen: a trick of the light, exhaustion, maybe stress, but the images burned in her mind. That figure, it had been impossibly still, impossibly silent, and yet she couldn't shake the certainty that it had followed her, that it had chosen her. That night, sleep didn't come. Every creak of her apartment floorboards, every flicker of the streetlights outside her window made her heart leap. She kept thinking she saw something in the corner of her room, a shadow, too tall, too thin to be human. She told herself it was her imagination. She had to tell herself that. But when morning came and Emily peeked through the blinds, the shadow was gone. Or perhaps it had never left. Emily spent the next few days in a state of near constant paranoia. Every shadow in her apartment seemed elongated. Every gust of wind against the windows sounded like footsteps approaching. She avoided driving at night, but the memory of the highway and that impossibly tall figure haunted her mind. Her friends laughed off her concerns. It was probably just someone hitchhiking, they said. You're overthinking it. But Emily couldn't shake the certainty that this was not normal. The figure had an unnatural stillness, a presence that shouldn't exist. On the third night, she had no choice. A work emergency required her to drive late. Her stomach knotted as she merged onto the same stretch of highway. The darkness felt heavier, almost oppressive, and the familiar streetlights flickered like warning signals. Then she saw it, standing at the same spot. The tall, thin figure, motionless, facing her. Her breath caught. She wanted to speed past, to close her eyes and drive as if it weren't there, but something held her gaze, a magnet pulling her attention toward it. Emily slowed the car again. The figure didn't move. She noticed now that it seemed to shimmer, as if slightly out of phase with reality. Her hands shook. She fumbled with the lock on the car doors, heart racing. Suddenly, her radio crackled and went dead, leaving only static. A chill ran down her spine. The air around her felt thicker, harder to breathe. Her headlights barely illuminated the figure, but she could see the impossibly long fingers flexing slightly, almost imperceptibly, like they were testing her fear. Panicked, she sped away, taking the next exit. She told herself it was a hallucination, a trick of exhaustion, but the feeling of being followed didn't leave. On the back roads, she glimpsed movement in the trees, shadows too tall and thin to be human. When she reached her apartment again, she locked the door and sank to the floor. Her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. You left too soon. Emily's breath caught. She looked out the window. Nothing, just the normal city street. Her mind screamed that the figure was here, somehow closer than ever. Sleep that night was impossible. Every creak, every flicker of light made her heart leap. She saw shadows move in her peripheral vision, sometimes right behind her reflection in mirrors. She began to feel trapped, as if the figure wasn't just on the highway, it was in her life. Her apartment, always observing by the fifth night, she noticed a pattern. Every time she blinked while looking in a mirror, the figure appeared, just for a fraction of a second, standing behind her. Not all the time, just long enough to make her doubt her own sanity. She tried recording video, but nothing appeared on the screen. It was as if it existed in a layer of reality only she could perceive. Emily's mental state frayed. She stopped talking to friends, stopped answering calls. Her life became a series of cautious movements and constant glances over her shoulder. Every night, she felt the same pull, the same presence, the same gaze burning into her back. One night, driven by a mix of fear and desperation, she decided to confront it. She drove back to the highway, to the exact spot where she first saw it. Her hands gripped the wheel so tightly she could feel her knuckles crack. She slowed to a crawl as she approached the figure. It was waiting, always waiting. And this time, Emily noticed something new. Its shadow stretched impossibly far, longer than it could possibly be, reaching toward her car like fingers brushing the asphalt. The air grew colder. She felt a vibration in her chest, a low hum that seemed to originate from the figure itself. She tried to speak, but her voice faltered. It raised one of its long, spindly arms, and for a split second, Emily thought it might wave. But the gesture was wrong, too slow, too deliberate. Almost mechanical. Emily floored the gas, racing down the highway, but the sense of being watched never left. She glanced in the rearview mirror and swore she saw the figure standing at the exit she had just passed, unmoving, watching her flee. When she arrived home, she bolted every door and window. But the feeling persisted, an oppressive awareness, as if the figure had somehow followed her, no longer bound to the highway. And then, the text message again. "You can't run forever." Emily's hands trembled. She realized this was no ordinary hitchhiker. It wasn't just a stranger standing on the side of the road. It was something else, something patient, relentless, waiting for her to lower her guard. Something that had chosen her hand. That choice was final. Emily could no longer bear the suffocating presence that had crept into her life. Every mirror, every window, every reflective surface seemed to betray her. She saw the tall, thin figure at the edge of vision constantly, sometimes standing just outside her apartment, sometimes behind her in the reflection of her own eyes, determined to confront it once and for all. Emily planned a risky journey back to the highway, armed only with a flashlight and a trembling sense of resolve. She drove under the cover of night, the streetlights flickering like warnings she couldn't ignore. Her pulse thundered in her ears with every mile closer to the place where it all began. When she arrived, the figure was already there, as if expecting her. Its presence pressed down on her, bending the air itself. She got out of the car, hands shaking, flashlight casting a thin beam through the darkness. It didn't move, didn't speak, didn't blink, but Emily could feel it. She could feel it thinking, planning, waiting. "Why me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible in the empty highway. Then, a sound soft, deliberate like fingertips brushing against asphalt. Emily's stomach dropped. The figure's shadow stretched impossibly far, curling around her feet, creeping toward the car, toward everything she had ever known. Her mind screamed at her to flee, but her body was rooted to the spot. And then, in a flicker of streetlight, she saw something she could never unsee. The figure's face, obscured before, was now clear. Impossibly distorted, yet human-like, features stretched, mouth slightly curved into a sinister smile. Its eyes, hollow and dark, burned into hers. Emily turned to run, tripping over loose gravel, her flashlight rolling and casting frantic, darting shadows across the highway. She scrambled into her car and slammed the doors, fumbling with the keys. She tried to start the engine, but it stalled. The figure's shadow was closer now, creeping along the asphalt toward her tires. Finally, the engine roared to life. She hit the gas and screamed down the highway, swerving past the trees and darkened signs. And yet, through the rearview mirror, she saw it. Standing on the exit she had just passed, but somehow closer, somehow larger, watching, waiting. Days passed, and Emily never returned to that highway. She moved to a new town, changed her routines, avoided mirrors, avoided reflective surfaces whenever possible. But the text messages didn't stop. "You can't hide. I'm always here. You'll see me soon." Then came the final message one night, when she was too exhausted to care. "Look outside." Emily froze. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, she glanced out the window, and there it was. Standing across the street, impossibly tall, impossibly thin, pale skin glowing in the streetlight. Its shadow stretched into her apartment, curling across the floor like a black mist. Emily dropped to the ground, gasping. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It simply stared, the air thick with a suffocating presence. For hours, she couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't even scream. And when morning came, the figure was gone at least. She told herself it was gone, but she knew the truth. She had seen enough to understand that it didn't follow her by distance or time. It followed her by awareness, by fear, by the part of her mind that could not rest. And so Emily lives with it still, in every mirror, in every reflection, in the corner of her vision. The figure waits, always waiting, because once it chooses you, it never lets go. Jordan had just moved into a small, modern apartment in the heart of the city. The rent was affordable, and the location was perfect close to work, cafes, and nightlife. But something about the building gave him pause. The lobby was almost always empty, and the elevators sometimes made odd, grinding noises, as if complaining about carrying passengers. The first few nights passed without incident. Jordan unpacked boxes, arranged furniture, and tried to ignore the occasional creak or thump from the walls. Old buildings always had noises, he told himself. Still, a sense of unease lingered, subtle but persistent. It started with small things. A shadow flickered across the hallway when he passed his door. He would glance back, but no one was there. Occasionally, he would hear soft footsteps in the corridor at night, slow and deliberate, stopping right outside his apartment. When he opened the door, the hallway was empty. One night, Jordan returned from work late, exhausted. He placed his keys on the counter and poured a glass of water. That's when he noticed something unsettling. A faint outline of a tall figure reflected in the stainless steel of the refrigerator. He spun around, but the apartment was empty. Shaking off the fear, he muttered to himself, "Just a trick of the light." Shadows, nothing more, but the occurrences grew more frequent. Objects were subtly moved: his keys, his mug, even a chair that he was certain he hadn't touched. Every night, he could hear the same slow footsteps pacing outside his apartment door. And every night, he would check, finding nothing. Then, it escalated. Jordan began seeing the figure inside the apartment itself. Always in the corners, always partially hidden, too thin, too tall, and impossibly still. When he blinked, it vanished. When he looked again, it was closer. One evening, as he sat on the couch scrolling through his phone, he felt a cold presence behind him. He didn't dare turn his head at first. A whisper of air brushed his neck. Finally, he glanced over and saw nothing. Yet the oppressive feeling remained, heavy and suffocating, like the air itself had thickened. Sleep became impossible. Jordan set up cameras in every room, hoping to catch evidence of what he suspected. Night after night, the recordings revealed nothing until one morning. He watched the footage and froze in the reflection of his bedroom window, behind the curtains, a figure stood. Tall, thin, its head tilted slightly, facing the camera. It didn't move, and there was no sound. But the shadow stretched impossibly across the floor, curling around his furniture. The footage had no audio of the footsteps he had heard so often. Yet the presence was undeniable. Jordan felt the first real terror creep into his mind. This was not a prank, not his imagination, not a coincidence. Something had chosen him, and it had found a way inside. The nights grew worse. Jordan could no longer sleep without the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of wind through the cracked windows made his heart race. Sometimes he would catch a glimpse of the figure in the reflection of the glass table, or in the shadowed corner of a room he had just left. He stopped inviting friends over, stopped leaving the apartment for late-night errands, and began to obsessively check every lock, every window. The figure never seemed to move, and yet it was always there, sometimes behind him in reflections, sometimes peering through the gap between his blinds. One night, as he sat in the living room, laptop open but forgotten, Jordan noticed the curtain sway slightly, though no breeze stirred the room. A soft thud echoed from the bedroom. His pulse quickened. He knew he was not imagining it this time. Slowly, cautiously, he rose to investigate. The bedroom was empty, but when he turned back toward the living room, his stomach dropped. The figure was standing at the edge of the couch, impossibly thin, its elongated fingers brushing the carpet. Its head tilted, as if studying him, measuring his fear. Jordan tried to speak. "Who? What do you want?" His voice cracked. The figure did not respond. It remained unnervingly still, radiating a presence that made the air heavy and oppressive. He ran to the door, intending to leave the apartment, but the handle seemed to resist him, sticking under his grip. Panicked, he yanked it open and stumbled into the hallway. The corridor was empty, or so he thought. A shadow flickered across the far end. Too tall, too thin, perfectly still but unmistakably human-like. Jordan froze, trapped between instinct and terror. The figure seemed to stretch impossibly, a dark distortion that moved closer without a sound. Over the following days, Jordan tried everything, leaving the apartment, calling friends, even contacting the building management. Nothing helped. Each night, the figure appeared in new ways. Sometimes in the reflection of a spoon, sometimes just at the edge of his vision, vanishing when he blinked. It was patient, relentless, always observing. He tried recording video and audio again, hoping for evidence, hoping for proof that he wasn't losing his mind. But when he watched the recordings, the figure had moved closer, always closer, but still only visible in reflections or shadows. It never appeared directly on the footage, as if it existed slightly out of phase with reality. One night, as Jordan lay in bed, he felt a whisper of air brush against his ear. The room was silent. He froze, heart hammering. Slowly, he reached for his phone. A text message had appeared. "You're mine now." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was suffocating. Jordan's apartment felt smaller, the air thicker. He understood then that this presence did not need doors or walls, existed beyond the physical, threading itself into his perception, into his reality. Panic overtook him. He ran through the apartment, turning on every light, shining his flashlight into corners, under furniture, into mirrors. The figure was nowhere to be seen, but Jordan could feel it coiling around him, silent, patient. And when he turned to glance at the window, the curtains moved again, and a shape appeared just beyond the glass, watching, waiting. Jordan couldn't endure it any longer. The figure was no longer confined to shadows or reflections. Its presence permeated every corner of the apartment, making the walls feel alive, breathing, closing in on him. Every mirror, every window, every reflective surface seemed like a portal for it to appear. One night, he decided he had to confront it. He sat in the center of his living room, lights on full, flashlight in hand, and called out in a voice quivering with fear, "Show yourself. I'm not afraid of you." For a moment, nothing. The apartment was silent, almost unnervingly so. Then he saw it. Standing in the far corner, impossibly thin, impossibly tall, head tilted slightly. Its shadow stretched unnaturally across the floor, twisting and curling like black smoke. Jordan felt the air grow colder, heavier, pressing against his chest. He moved closer, stepping cautiously toward the figure. The floorboards groaned under his weight. The figure remained still, but the sensation of being watched intensified to a nearly unbearable level. Jordan's hands shook as he raised the flashlight, illuminating its face, or what passed for a face. The features were human-like, but distorted, grotesque in their perfection, pale skin glowing faintly in the harsh light, eyes hollow and unblinking, mouth curved into a sinister smile that made his stomach churn. The figure tilted its head, studying him, measuring his fear. Jordan backed away, tripping over the edge of the rug. He scrambled toward the door, yanking it open, desperate to escape. The hallway stretched infinitely before him, shadows writhing in unnatural patterns. And then, from the reflection of the elevator doors, he saw it, standing behind him. Impossibly close, though he had run, still silent, still patient. He stumbled outside, gasping for air. The city street was empty, bathed in the harsh glow of streetlights. The figure did not follow, at least not in a physical sense. But Jordan could feel it, a weight pressing on his mind, threading into his thoughts. Every glance over his shoulder, every shadow at the corner of his vision, he could feel its gaze. Days passed. Jordan tried to leave the apartment, tried to escape the building, but every new place he stayed seemed haunted by the same oppressive presence. It was patient, relentless, existing slightly out of phase with reality, a predator of perception and fear. One evening, while reviewing his security footage, he noticed something new. The figure appeared inside the recordings for a fraction of a second, just at the edge of the frame. Each appearance was closer than the last, moving toward the camera, toward him. His blood ran cold. Then came the final message on his phone. "You can never leave." Jordan's hands trembled as he looked out the window. Across the street, a silhouette appeared in the glow of a streetlight, tall, impossibly thin, still and unblinking. Its shadow stretched unnaturally, crawling along the sidewalk. Reaching toward him, he understood, with a sick clarity, that this figure was not bound by walls, streets, or cities. It existed wherever he was, patient, waiting, feeding on his fear. Once it chose you, it never let go. Jordan sat in his apartment, every light on, shaking. He didn't sleep. He didn't leave the room. And somewhere in the distance, or perhaps just beyond the veil of reality, the figure waited, always waiting, because some things aren't meant to be seen or understood. They are meant to follow, to linger, to haunt. And for Jordan, the visitor had arrived, and it would never leave. Nathan had always loved the solitude of the forest. Hollow Creek was a remote stretch of wilderness, far from the city, where the trees grew dense and the air smelled of earth and pine. It was the perfect place for a weekend getaway or so, he thought. The first day was peaceful. Nathan hiked along the winding trails, listening to the distant rush of the creek and the occasional call of a bird. The forest was alive, but quiet in a way that comforted him. He set up camp near a clearing, lit a small fire, and watched the flames dance. But as night fell, the forest seemed to change. Shadows grew longer, stretching across the trees in ways that defied logic. The crackle of his fire sounded unusually loud, and the wind whispered through the pines in a low, sibilant voice. Nathan shook his head. "It's just the forest," he muttered. "Nothing more." It began subtly at first. A flicker of movement at the edge of his vision. Branches snapping in places where no animals could be. The feeling of being watched, heavy and insistent. He told himself it was paranoia, the isolation playing tricks on his mind. Then he saw it. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing at the far edge of the clearing. At first, he thought it was another camper, but as he focused, he realized there were no signs of a backpack, no campfire, nothing to suggest another human presence. And yet, it was there, completely still, eyes fixed on him. Nathan froze. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. Its limbs were unnaturally long, fingers brushing the ground as if testing the space between itself and the earth. Its presence pressed down on Nathan, suffocating and oppressive, making every breath feel heavy. He tried to call out, but his voice caught in his throat. The figure remained unwavering, almost patient in its observation. Nathan backed toward his tent, every step slow, careful, but his heart pounded so loudly it seemed the figure could hear it. For hours, he watched it. From the moment the sun set until the fire burned low, the figure stood at the edge of the clearing, silent, motionless, a dark silhouette against the night. When dawn finally broke, it was gone, or at least, Nathan told himself it was gone, but the forest kept its secrets. By the next night, he heard footsteps circling his camp, slow and deliberate, brushing against the underbrush without a sound. And when he glanced up from his fire, the figure had returned. Closer now, standing among the trees, its head tilted, watching him with an intelligence that made Nathan's stomach churn. The presence was patient, unyielding, and undeniably aware of him. Nathan realized, with a chill he couldn't shake, that this was not an animal, not a lost hiker, not even a hallucination. Something had chosen him, and it was waiting, biding its time, studying him. Nathan couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig set his nerves on edge. By the second night, he was no longer confident he was alone. The figure had returned, always at the periphery of his vision, standing among the trees, its elongated limbs perfectly still, its head tilted. Studying him, he tried to distract himself with mundane tasks, gathering firewood, cleaning his campsite, but the figure seemed to anticipate every move, lurking just beyond the firelight. Shadows stretched unnaturally in the glow of the flames, curling toward him, as if trying to consume the small circle of light he had created. Nathan thought about leaving. Retreating to the safety of civilization seemed like the only rational choice. But as he packed his belongings, he heard it. The slow, deliberate cracking of branches behind him. Not random, not animal, but measured like steps, pacing, testing him. He spun around. Nothing. only the trees, dark and silent. But the oppressive feeling remained, pressing against his chest, making it hard to breathe. Nathan realized he wasn't seeing the figure, yet it was seeing him. Watching, always watching. That night, the wind shifted. The sound of the creek, once soothing, became a low, ominous gurgle. The fire flickered wildly, shadows dancing across the clearing. Nathan's heart raced. He could feel its presence moving closer, though he couldn't see it clearly. The temperature dropped, his breath visible in the air. Then, just as he thought he might lose his mind, he caught a glimpse of it. In the reflection of the creek's surface, a tall, thin silhouette stood at the far edge of the clearing, impossibly still. Its arms hung long, fingers brushing the water. Its face was obscured, but Nathan felt the gaze penetrate him, analyzing, judging. Fear overtook him. He grabbed his flashlight, waving it frantically across the clearing. The figure didn't flinch, didn't move, and then it was gone. Or perhaps it had never been there in the way he expected. Sleep was impossible. Nathan stayed awake, flashlight in hand, scanning every shadow, listening for the crunch of unseen footsteps. And he noticed something even more terrifying: the feeling of being surrounded. The figure was not confined to the clearing. It moved through the trees in ways that defied logic, slipping silently through the forest, always observing, always closer than he imagined. By the third night, Nathan could no longer ignore it. He tried calling for help on his phone, but there was no signal in Hollow Creek. Panic set in. He considered fleeing, but the forest itself seemed alive, the trees whispering, branches reaching toward him, shadows stretching impossibly far. Every path he took led him back toward the figure's gaze, and then, as he rounded a bend near the creek, he saw it more clearly than ever. The figure stood among the trees, impossibly tall, impossibly thin, shadows stretching like a living thing. Its head tilted, eyes dark hollows that seemed to bore into him. For the first time, Nathan felt it. Not just fear, but an awareness that the figure had him, that it could enter his mind, bend his perception. A sound came from the tree's soft, deliberate, like fingertips brushing bark, circling him, waiting. Nathan understood something essential and terrifying. This was not a being he could outrun or hide from. It was patient, methodical, and it had chosen him. Nathan's fear had reached a breaking point. Every shadow, every whisper of wind, every ripple in the creek seemed infused with the figure's presence. It was no longer confined to the edge of the clearing. It was everywhere, moving through the forest like a dark pulse, threading itself into the very air around him, determined to confront it. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the trees, following the trail where he had last seen the figure. The forest closed in around him, every branch reaching out like grasping fingers. The creek murmured ominously, and the ground seemed to tremble with unseen movement. He found the figure standing beside the water, its long limbs bending unnaturally, casting shadows that twisted and writhed on the forest floor. Its face was partially illuminated by the moonlight, distorted, almost human, yet alien. Its hollow eyes bored into Nathan's mind. "Why are you here?" Nathan's voice cracked. "What do you want from me?" No answer. Only the silence of the forest, thick and suffocating. The figure tilted its head slowly, deliberately, as if savoring his terror. The shadow it cast stretched far beyond its physical form, reaching across the creek, curling around the trees, almost touching Nathan's feet. Nathan stepped back, tripping over a root. The flashlight clattered to the ground, casting frantic, darting beams across the forest. For a moment, The figure disappeared door, so he thought. When his flashlight finally rested on the clearing again, it was closer. And then it was behind him, though he hadn't heard a sound. A cold wind swept through the forest, carrying with it a whisper, "You cannot escape." Nathan spun, heart hammering, but the trees behind him were empty. The creek reflected only the moonlight, but he could feel the figure's gaze burning through him everywhere, in every shadow. He realized then that it was not bound by physical distance. It existed in his awareness, threading itself into his mind, following him wherever he went. He ran. Branches scratched his face, roots tripped him, but he couldn't stop. The figure's presence pressed down on him, heavy and inescapable, like the air itself had grown solid. Every step led him deeper into the forest, yet the sense of being watched never left. Finally, he stumbled into a small clearing, panting, shaking. The figure stood at the far edge, impossibly tall, perfectly still. Its shadow stretched unnaturally across the clearing, curling toward Nathan as if alive. He raised his arms, screaming, but the forest swallowed the sound. Hours seemed to pass. Nathan sank to the ground, trembling. The figure did not move, but its presence was suffocating, threading into every thought, every fear, every memory. He realized, with a cold clarity, that this was not a creature he could fight, outsmart, or outrun. It was patient, relentless, existing slightly out of phase with reality. Feeding on his terror, the whisper came again, carried on the wind. "You are mine now," Nathan understood. There was no escape, no refuge, no way to outrun the figure. It had chosen him, and that choice was eternal. The forest grew silent. The creek stilled. The moonlight cast a pale glow over the clearing, illuminating Nathan's wide, terrified eyes. And in that quiet, suffocating moment, he felt it. The figure was all around him, within him, a part of his perception, his awareness, his very mind. Days, weeks, months passed. Nathan was never seen again. Hikers sometimes reported glimpses of a tall, thin figure at the edge of Hollow Creek, always watching, never moving. And if you venture into the forest at night, some say you can still feel its presence, patient and unyielding, waiting for the next soul it has chosen, because once it chooses, it never lets go.